Tori Eisman, Benchmark Real Estate Group, and today we're with Total Health Guidance, some amazing counselors and mental health workers that we're going to talk about how to deal with being confined in your home and the stresses of all of that. So I know it can be very challenging. Everybody's on my last nerve right now. I need to get out and about. So parents, children, right? Our children want. We're trying to work. How do you deal with that and still let them feel loved, right? I think that's the most important thing. How do we not get so frustrated we want to scream? And I was watching, I watched Dr. Phil on occasion, and yesterday, just for like 10 minutes, he had some lady on there that had a back scratcher that she literally named, I don't remember what it was, but it was like ass smacker or something. No. And she claims she hasn't used it, but the children are hiding it. So obviously there's some stress taking place in that household. So what suggestions do you guys give?
Well, I'm going to just start by saying hello and introducing, I think, everybody, if you've been with us before, John Steitler, one of our counselors here, Coven, our amazing acupuncture physician, and Catherine Cobb is another counselor here on the line or on video with us. John, if you could just kind of talk about what we're going to go into today, and then you can start, okay?
Sure. I think we'll talk through some just some basic parenting tips, as well as just communication tips in general, communication principles, especially when you're, like Tori said, you're locked in the same house together. The tensions can be on the rise. And we'll talk through some basic just stress management tips again. So some of the same things we've covered in previous weeks, just about how to lower your stress in general, so that when we are getting our buttons pushed by some of those people in the same room, maybe we won't be tempted to go fly off the handle or need that swatter that you were referencing, Tori. So that's what we'll start with. I think there's some basic principles of communication that we'll cover. Tony's going to go over a few. Coven can jump in with some basic like stress management techniques and things to keep our stress levels down. And then I'm going to share one particular tool called the feedback format. Whenever we feel like we have some feedback to give to somebody else in the house, whether that's a spouse or a child or something like that, and how we can do that. So that's kind of the plan. Tony, do you want to talk through a few just general communication principles at a high level?
The first thing, I think, a very simple thing with any type of communication, it's probably more common now than it was years ago, but it's called I statements. And I know John was going to talk about the feedback format, so I'll just talk about I statements and let him kind of follow up on that later. But again, when we're in these tight quarters and we're in these, things that kind of have our conflict model up a little bit higher than it normally is, we have to be really careful in how we speak to one another, because the other people are probably in the same level. Everything's just intense. So if we focus on I statements, it really kind of takes the blame and the shame and any of the aggression usually out of the conversation. So instead of saying, you made me mad, it's, when you did this, I'm feeling this. So it's a way to take ownership of how you're feeling. And in that moment, the other person can relate to actually how you're feeling. It's not really focused on a thing that's happened or perceived to have happened. It's, I'm upset, I'm sad, I'm scared. And that can help the other person with letting down their guard to be able to let the communication flow in a more normal way. So that's a really key factor, I think, in any type of conflict and in any type of communication. It doesn't necessarily have to be conflict. It's just really kind of identifying what I'm feeling, what I need, and how I'm going to express it so that the other person hears it. Because in communication, the bottom line is we want the other person to be able to hear what we're saying. Otherwise, what's the point?
What about when you're living with somebody that might be a little passive aggressive that can't respond back, or you watch body language and they're offended regardless of what you say? Yeah. How do you address that?
You can ask questions. I find for me, asking questions is always the best thing, instead of saying, well, you look irritated. Because that's going to be like, I'm not irritated. They may not even be aware that they are presenting physically in their physical reactions, that we're obviously, as humans, we're aware of people's reaction, the way they move, the way they smile, the looks on their faces, body gestures, that thing. So it's, are you okay? How are you feeling? Did something I say make you feel a certain way? Just maybe inquire into the response instead of saying that they're doing something, because that often sounds like an accusation when someone's upset. You look mad, or about to say, how are you feeling? Maybe ask questions. Don, you want to add a little bit to that?
Yeah, that actually is probably a good lead into kind of the concept of that feedback format that I was talking about. And in communication, there's really three parts to communication. One is there's the facts and the data, right? And then there's the interpretation of the facts and the data, and then there's your feelings about it. So oftentimes when I'm doing therapy with individuals or couples, I might sit like this with my arms crossed, and I say, hey, give me right now, if you were giving me feedback, what are the facts and the data about me right now? And inevitably they'll say something like, well, you're mad, you're closed off, you're upset with me, and they'll give me all these things, and I'll say, well, what you just gave me really was your interpretation, not the facts and the data. The facts and the data is I'm sitting with my arms crossed, right? So there's the facts that I'm sitting with my arms crossed. The interpretation is you're mad, you're judging me, you're looking down on me, or whatever. And then there's the feelings. So if you think that I'm judging you and looking down on you, or I'm closed off, how would you feel? And they say, well, gosh, I'm paying you money to be here and to talk to you, so I'm pissed off, or I'm disappointed, or I'm upset. And the goal in communication really is empathy, right? It's feeling what the other person's feeling and being able to give back. So if we start there at the feelings, and to say in that example, okay, you think I'm judging you, and you're angry because I'm judging you. Wow, how does that make you feel? Tell me more about that. I mean, I always say some of the three best words in a marriage is tell me more. Because you tell me more, it gets to the heart. It's not just letting somebody vent, but it's really getting to the heart of, I really want to know, what is it that you're feeling? Wow, is it like this? You're trying to connect at the emotional level first. And then once the person says, yes, you get it, that's how I'm feeling. When you can ask, like, so do you think I understand? Because I can jump really quickly and say, yeah, I know what you mean. But do I really know what you mean? So you're asking for feedback from the other person. And when that person says, yeah, you get it, at that point, you can go for the feelings up to the interpretation. And you have two choices. You can either own the interpretation, or you can correct it. So I could say, you know what, I really was mad. I'm sorry. It's been a really long day. I was whatever, and I'm really sorry. I can own the fact that I was judging you, or closed off, or whatever the interpretation was. Or I can correct it. I can just say, you know what, yes, I'm sitting in my arms crossed, but I'm not mad at all. I'm sitting under this air conditioner vent, and I'm cold. So there might be a whole different reason why I'm sitting like this. And what I find in communications, very rarely are people arguing about the facts and the data. I'm not going to say my arms are crossed. We agree on the facts and the data, and your feelings are always valid. Typically the disconnect is in that interpretation. But if I were to go very quickly into, if you said, well, you're sitting there like that, and you're so closed off, and you're angry. If I just said, no, I'm not closed off, I'm not angry, even if that might be true, maybe I really am just cold. But I just shut you down. I didn't really validate your feelings. So if I start with the empathy piece, tell me more about that. How does that feel? And then I connect there and go up to the interpretation. It's usually better received. Hopefully that makes sense.
So what about recovery, right? So right now we might be in a heightened emotional state, and the thinking forward of asking questions or not being reactive is an afterthought, right? I'm going to snap at my kids because I'm trying to do work and they need help with homework and I feel overwhelmed, or my spouse is asking me questions and I'm in the middle of doing something and I just don't want to be bothered because I feel overwhelmed. So I react. Now I need to recover. How do you recover from that reaction when somebody's already got heightened emotions because you reacted?
Yeah. I think, one of the things is, the key thing is always being kind of prepared and being proactive. So since we know we're kind of locked in, we're going to have to be in these close quarters. Again, DJ Spiedner, one of our counselors here, wrote a great blog. And the first part about the communication says at the end of it, it's like, prepare to have regular check-ins. So a way to potentially even avoid that response is to have regular check-ins weekly where everybody's coming together as a family group or as a group in the house, whether it's roommates or whatever, and kind of talking about where they are, how they're feeling about the current situation, because that may reduce or maybe even eliminate some of those reactions instead of being able to respond in the moment. When you have, responded, because I think we all we're triggered sometimes, we kind of get back. I think John said it earlier, is kind of owning, like, hey, look, at some point, hey, do you have a minute? I just want to, when you said this earlier, I would really responded this way. I'm really sorry, and explain why, I was feeling really intense. There's a lot going on, and just apologize. I think that would be helpful. We're family, and friends living together. I think that just being, but again, as John said, validating. Like, if I know that I snapped at somebody, I want to make sure I go to them and say, hey, I'm sorry, and just apologize simply. I think that could be enough. That's one way.
You can use that feedback format in that scenario too, like to go back to the facts and the data is, I snapped at you earlier. I said this, or I did this, I hit you with that swatter, or I said, I called you a name, or I gave you a dirty look. So that's the facts and the data. My interpretation is you were probably pretty offended by that, or that scared you, or I hurt your feelings, or whatever. And I want to confirm, how do you feel about that? And then really listen to how the person feels as part of that ownership, listening to and empathizing, validating their feelings, and then going back and saying, like Tony just mentioned, hey, I really am sorry. I was wrong for doing that. And this is what I intend to do next time. And the proactive part gets to, okay, how do we begin to lower our temperature so we're not constantly at that heightened state, just 1 degree away from the boiling point. So I know, Coben, maybe you could talk a little bit about just what are some things that you found that you're doing to keep your stress level down, and some things that maybe other people can do to reduce their stress.
Yeah, so one of the best physical things that we can do to help reduce stress, especially in the moment, because there's a lot of things we can do afterwards in recovery phase and things like that. But in the moment, we can actually be working on just intentionally taking deep breaths. So, it might sound cliche like, oh, just breathe, or, woosah, sort of a thing. But the reality is by breathing, it's one of the few manual techniques that we can do that actually forces the sympathetic nervous system to decrease its tone. So it allows the parasympathetic, which is responsible for rest and refresh, to actually increase its tone. And so oftentimes in those moments of heightened either anxiety or irritation or just frustration, maybe, you're just a little bit on edge, and then someone in your household said that one thing that they needed to say that triggered you enough to just be like, blood pressure's up, you've got that mild headache now, eyes are getting tight, all these sort of symptoms that are often associated with that overactive sympathetic nervous system. And so doing something as simple, it seems overly simple, but just taking a few minutes to just kind of force yourself to breathe deeply will actually bring down that sympathetic nervous system and really encourage your body's natural, hormones, neurotransmitters that are responsible and helpful in that kind of refreshing and resting, kind of resetting type of phase. And so when I say breathing techniques, it's not just like in the middle of an argument going, okay, what's next? It has to be a little bit more intentional than one breath. Right now I'm working with my niece, who's 3, on different breathing techniques because she gets overwhelmed, just like all of us do, about things, and then it just amplifies. I can see it in her face, and she's so serious. And so I'll just remind her, like, hey, let's pause and let's breathe for a second. In her 3-year-old exuberance, it's usually maybe 1 or 2 breaths that I can get her to pause enough for, and then she's either resolved the emotion or she's ready to go run into something, and so it's really like challenging yourself to actually take more than 2 breaths, and it's making sure you're inhaling deeply as you can. Try to imagine your belly filling up with air and then exhaling kind of slowly. Oftentimes we exhale quickly, just kind of like, it's kind of like that sigh, that dramatic little trigger that if we hear maybe our family member or our partner, you hear that exhale, something's wrong. And so, you know, like instead of doing that kind of loud, quick, abrupt exhale, actually forcing yourself to like exhale quietly and then elongate that exhale. Okay. As well as like elongate the inhale. So allow your body to actually slow down. You know, we think of breathing as, you know, just something that we do without really actually thinking about it. And while it's true, our body does breathe in what we need without us having to think about it. We need to actually take the moment to pause and breathe intentionally, as well as thinking about how we're breathing. How does my body feel when I'm taking this inhale that lasts 10 seconds? And maybe count like a 10-second inhale and then a 10-second exhale. You know, it adds a layer of mindfulness into something as simple as breathing that forces us to kind of separate from whatever was overwhelming us moments before. And so I think, you know, as for stress relievers in the moment of tension, breathing is probably one of the easiest.
So I think for parents, you know, I had a child that went through a tremendous amount of health issues for 6-7 years. For 3, we thought he was dying, couldn't get answers. And his meltdowns during that time frame were heightened and maybe it was normal for that age, I don't know. But at the time, it appeared to be very heightened. So when you're in the midst of that, you're stressed, they're stressed. I mean, breathing's great when you're consciously thinking of it, but when you're in this tantrum of throwing things or slamming doors, and we know people are experiencing that right now. Maybe nobody wants to talk about it, but the reality of the matter is it's happening. There's meltdowns all over the place. There's children that are getting depressed because they're younger. They can't process or understand why they can't go play with their friends. There's people that have special needs that are like, why can't I go there because I'm not sick? Like, and in their minds, they're probably feeling like people don't care about them or don't like them. So what is a parent to do when they're in that stressful of a situation? I mean, it's challenging.
Yeah. I think, you know, I think I said earlier, planning ahead, I think is the biggest thing. You know, we know that if we as adults are conflicted and struggling with the challenge, that is, we have to, as parents, not a parent from a great uncle, but you know, talk to our children because they're younger. I mean, we all know that kids, and again, as you said, Tori, they might not have a clear understanding of why. They don't care why. They just want to be outside playing with their friends, and they can't, and they're upset. So if we, you know, I think talk to our kids like they're smart, because they are, and just explain in a soft, gentle way. And also, I think when we're, you know, what's going on, and acknowledge the difficulty, and then ask them how they feel about it. I think a lot of times adults are always trying to educate children and talk at children instead of listening to what they say. So asking them how they're feeling will give the parent a more clear understanding, and that'll give the parent the ability to find more options in terms of explaining what's going on for that child.
Well, I think one of the things you said is really, really important. And, you know, I don't know that we realize, and I didn't realize, but maybe other people are more aware than I was when my son was younger. But I went through a phase within a year that I lost both of my parents and I lost my job, and I was financially fine. However, in my mind, I feared being homeless. I feared things that could potentially happen to me. So when I was on the phone having conversations with people, I would share the things that I was concerned about, not having the awareness that I had a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old in the background listening to that. Now at age 17, my son's biggest fear is being homeless. He's never encountered anything of financial distresses in his entire life. Can you share a little bit about our stresses, our emotions, our conversations, and what age of children are highly impacted? Maybe it's all, I don't know, but the awareness that we have to have on our behaviors and our conversations in front of these children.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tori. Sorry, Tori, were you going to comment on that?
No, I was going to say it's a great point. I was going to actually lead to you, John. I think that, you know, one of the things I really want to stress is just talking to our children that they're intelligent beings. You know, as I know when I was a kid, I hated being talked to like I was a kid, like I didn't know. So it's, and I think that's really clear. If you're struggling, if you have these fears and the kids hear it, it's going to be multiple for them, because I think children don't often know how to express the fear in a healthy way. So it's going to create more of the animosity in the house and the misbehavior and the misbehaving. So John, obviously being a dad, you could probably speak to that more clearly.
Yeah, a lot of times we just don't recognize it. It's easier to see in other people than it is in our own home. But if you think back, if you celebrated Christmas as a kid, were you able to find the packages before Christmas morning? Sometimes did you know where your parents hid packages? Kids are smart, and they hear things and they find things that that a lot of times parents aren't aware of. So as a parent, if your 4-year-old came to you and said, "Mommy, I'm so scared about how we're going to pay rent this month," hopefully as a good parent, you would say, regardless of what your financial situation was, you would say, "Oh, sweetie, you don't need to worry about that. Mommy and daddy have that. You go out and play," because their shoulders aren't big enough to handle that kind of weight, kind of responsibility. But like you said, sometimes we have big ears. They have big ears, and they can find things. So they see things that we're not aware of, and that can be a lasting trigger. Like you said, you have a 17-year-old now that's fearing being homeless because of, in a sense, this was a trauma. It's not PTSD, or it doesn't meet the clinical definitions of that kind of trauma. But when people have trauma reactions, it's not so much what happened to them as it is about what do they believe about themselves as a result of what happened. So hearing that message he's having a little trauma reaction. Now, there's good news is there's lots of therapeutic techniques that we can do. We can do a quick root cause assessment to see how that trauma is manifesting in his life. And there's some therapy techniques that we do to quickly kind of resolve that trauma and kind of create a new neural pathway. He's going down this path that's very familiar to him. And anytime he hears something on the news about, the economy and people getting unemployed, it triggers like, oh my gosh, am I going to be homeless? Because that's a familiar pathway. So he's got to create a new pathway. And that's a little more in depth than what we're going to cover right now. But obviously we do free consultations for anybody dealing with. I have 60-year-old clients who have been living this trauma reaction for 40 or 50 years. Every time they hear a certain song or something like that, it plays back a reaction. Tori, what you were asking Tony to begin with about once the breathing techniques, the self-care, the proactive part that Tony and Coven talked about, keeping yourself below the boiling point, that's critical. But the reality is some people are already there. Some people are blowing up, they're past the boiling point. So breathing or doing something like that is not going to be enough. And that's when I just want to emphasize again, we would be more than willing to do free sessions with anybody that's at that point. If they feel like anybody listening to this feels like they're at a point where they're ready to blow up or ready to strike their child or do something that they know cognitively is not right, but emotionally they're on edge, please reach out to us, and we'd be more than happy to do a free session and see if we can help create a new pathway for them.
So I think a fear, right? A fear of reaching out to you would be, is DCF going to come to my door if I share something with you? Like, how do I know that my family's protected if I have a conversation? I think there's a lot of fear out there. I know even conversations at one point, there was something that happened with my son, and I had DCF call me and they wanted to come visit us. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I don't want you in my house. And I called 3 lawyers. Luckily, they're all my friends. And it wasn't anything we did. It was something that happened with a third party. And they were, because of a story I shared, they said that they were required to report that, something that happened with a medical doctor. And my biggest fear was, A, I don't want you in my house. And B, I don't want my kid taken away. But meanwhile, I have resources, right? I was able to pick up the phone, call 3 lawyers, have somebody on a conference call when these people showed up at my home, set the parameters. People don't have those resources. Yeah. And if they feel like they're in that explosive place, they may be afraid to make that phone call to you when they need to make it most.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it is important to understand the boundaries of confidentiality. So as licensed counselors, there's certain things that fall clearly within the bounds of confidentiality. Basically, everything you tell us is completely confidential. We cannot even disclose that you came to see us, let alone what we talked about. So the only exceptions to that is if you're telling me that you have a plan, you have an active plan to either hurt yourself or to hurt somebody else. Like or if you've sexually abused a minor. If the parent came to me and said, oh my gosh, I'm having thoughts, like sometimes I just want to scream, I want to hit my kids, I want to shake them, that's confidential. Okay, if they tell me that they are continually doing it every night, they go and they beat their child, that is something that by law, not just as counselors, but in Florida, everybody is a required reporter. If anybody tells you that somebody's abusing a child, if you do not report it, whether you're a counselor or a layperson, if you don't report that, you can be held criminally responsible.
I just think it's really important to have that conversation because you guys are doing an amazing thing right now. You're opening up your entire team to be there for people that are at a very heightened stage. And I know you're doing some complimentary stuff relative to that. And I don't want people to feel like they're afraid. I don't want them to feel like they can't pick up that phone, because right now's the time that, especially that you're presenting this amazing offer, to pick up that phone and to call. And I call it coaching. You can call it counseling, but I call it coaching because I think some people feel like counseling has a derogatory name attached to it, that something's wrong with them. We all need coaching. Whether it's in business or personal life, medically, coaching makes us better and makes us stronger. And I know you were talking a little bit this morning about service people. Can you talk about what you're doing with some of the service people right now?
Like the theme park employees?
Yes.
We are just rolling out. We're just in the early stages of Tony and I are still working out the details. That it's going to be rolled out in the next day or two. We're working on a program. We've got some scholarship funds set aside for people who have been laid off from theme parks, and we're going to be offering some free counseling services. That information will be released to the public here probably in the next day or so.
Let's talk about people that are at their wits' end with their spouse. You know, I've had a couple people reach out to me in the last couple of weeks, and they're like, I need an attorney. I don't know necessarily that they need an attorney, then they need a coach to see if they need an attorney.
So I can tell you that leads perfectly into the next phase of what DJ wrote in his blog. It's keep your own emotions in check. You know, it's really important to, again, be aware of the fact that we're in close quarters with one another, and that if we react emotionally, it may not be what we really want. We have to bring our logic mind into play. So again, when I post a blog, people can read that on our website. It's just totalhealthguidance.com. But he kind of talks about being reasonable with your emotions. So in that, I think what we have to do is just be aware of the situation. We are not allowed to go outside for the most part. We have to, if we argue against that, it doesn't change the fact, I think I said this the last time, that we're locked in. We have to kind of be able to accept that and then understand what that means. Me being locked in a room with my family, what does that mean for me? And be honest, I'm just frustrated. I've got, kids in the house that I don't normally see for 12 hours, 24 hours a day, and I just, I'm going crazy. It's okay to maybe not say that to your kids, but allow yourself to feel whatever it is you're feeling. I think when you try to hide that, it does change things. And with that, I do want to go back to one thing John said. I think it's really important about the body language and the facial cues and the facial expressions. I just want to make sure everybody is aware that those things are very real. I mean, body language is a very real study. So even though you might be off, and I think it was really important that John said you have to get back to, identifying what that really was. Don't, second guess your intuition and let that prevent you from actually speaking and solving the situation to make sure you're okay and the other person's okay. And I think the same thing with COVID. I think something she really said that's really important is, the physical self, the breath work, being conscious of breathing, which I know she said, but I just wanted to really tie that in. Like, it's not just breathing, it's actually thinking, even about, I need to slow down. Like, I need to relax, and saying these things to yourself. It's sort of a way to have a minute moment of meditation over and over again throughout your day. I think she did a really good job explaining that. John, do you want to add more?
I just real quickly go back to Tori's last comment about the whole idea of coaching. And really the vast majority of what we do here really is coaching. We do more coaching. There's a difference between counseling and coaching, but there's quite a bit of overlap. And with coaching takes somebody from where you are now to the future, where you want to go. So we do relational coaching, we do health coaching, we do nutrition coaching, we do business coaching, life coaching. And that takes you forward. It's goal setting, it's progress, it's motivational. All those things are part of coaching. Counseling is where you're looking back in time. So counselors diagnose. We give a diagnosis, and we look back in history and trying to heal something from the past. So there is the vast majority, because a lot of times for counselors, the other time we really have to diagnose this, whether you're going through insurance or whether you're getting medication. If you're not going through insurance or using medication, there's no need for a diagnosis. So oftentimes the bulk of what we do falls within the area of coaching. And we call it that too, because like you said, sometimes there is a stigma. So we do parent coaching, we do relational coaching. And we have 2 therapists on our team that are very specific, trained in parent coaching. They work with children, they do play therapy, or they help parents work with kids, in parent coaching.
I'm glad you defined that, because you're right. In counseling, if you don't know the past, you can't heal the future. So who's got some suggestions on, when you get up in the morning and you already feel overwhelmed, you have children under the age of 12 or 13 years old, what kind of tips can you give of what, for me in general, when I felt so overwhelmed with what was happening in my life, and I only had one child, and at the time, because of his health issues, trying to do school was just so overwhelming, and he was so rebellious at the time. And it wasn't that he was a bad kid, he didn't feel good. So these kids right now probably don't feel good, whether it's not necessarily a medical ailment, but just the isolation and the inability to do what they're used to doing. We played games. So we had a spelling test. We had a hide and seek with spelling. I mean, my sister was a genius. She worked at a daycare. She came up with all this stuff and did most of it because I didn't have the temperament for that, right? I say, do it. I expect you to do it. I don't know fun. I need to learn fun. But how can we incorporate some sort of fun for these parents to get the kids to want to do their work and create a reward system rather than a system of being punished, so that it can be a better household environment?
Yeah, okay, great question. Kobe, you look like you're going to respond to that.
Yeah, I'd love to respond to that. So I had a couple thoughts, especially as it comes to like younger children, but of course we can use this as adults as well. So one thing is, in order to kind of like help bring our emotional stressors down, physical activity is really important. And so we know, of course, having routines and habits really helps provide the structure that right now structure seems really abstract in a lot of ways. A lot of us are working from home. We can start our days a little bit slower. We might be staying up later because we don't have to get up as early. Like all these routines and habits that we might have had in place prior to, the stay-at-home order is now shifted. And so we might be more lax about those things. So creating structure around morning routines is going to be really helpful in just having a less stressful and also maybe more productive day, especially as it relates to, having your kids at home and homeschooling them. I was homeschooled for the majority of my education. And my mom was very structured, but we also had time for breaks and, joyful things. So, like we do need that structure, but I think when it relates to having younger kids homeschooling, that, the parents didn't want to homeschool. The kids didn't necessarily want to homeschool. We're all just kind of in this situation where homeschooling is kind of just what's pushed on us, is kind of like having those breaks. And, if you're able to step away from work periodically to go do something odd or even spontaneous. When we used to get overwhelmed, we would take tea breaks. And so sometimes we would go put on, a different outfit because this was our fancy sort of thing. And we'd all be, silly and maybe speak in accents and just drink tea for 15 or 20 minutes. And then we'd go back and all of us were refreshed. And so, tea might not be what works for your kids or for you, but like thinking through that kind of spontaneous random thing, maybe it's a picnic outside, having a snack for 15 minutes, getting some sunshine, or walking around the block so you're getting that physical activity too, or even just stopping, playing a board game really quick or something, and then coming back to each of you guys however you're doing it. So my points to summarize would be like having that routine, keeping some level of spontaneity and joy and laughter into the routine as well. And then, of course, physical activity, especially for younger kids who have a lot of difficulty maybe expressing what they're feeling, like their stress and anxiety affects all of us in the same way physiologically. It's going to be producing more cortisol. We're going to be producing, adrenaline. And what those hormones do to us is it makes us feel like we're ready to run. And so if we're not using those hormones for what they're meant to do, it causes further anxiety. So doing something physical, even if it's just, jumping up and down for a minute, helps to exert those hormones so they're not in your system, causing your body to become more overwhelmed. And so especially for younger kids, like if you see they're overwhelmed, like, hey, let's just do 10 jumping jacks right now. Have them do jumping jacks until you see their face starts to change. And, it sounds a little odd maybe, but it really will help kids to process like that burst of energy because, their adrenal glands just shot them a bunch of adrenaline. And so in their minds, you're maybe trying to have a serious conversation with them, having them sit still, but their body's not ready to sit still right now because they've got all these hormones and chemicals telling them, we've got to go, we've got to go, we've got to go.
Yeah. I think there's an age-old business mantra that says failing to plan is planning to fail, and that's probably familiar to a lot of people. So I think just to echo what Coven was just saying is making a plan and being proactive. So it doesn't have to be a long time. It comes down to intentionality, but taking maybe 15 minutes at night after you get the kids to bed and you breathe, just be a dedicated 15 minutes where you grab a notebook, you grab a pen, and you just think, okay, what are some ideas for tomorrow? What is it, okay, jumping jacks, the tea break, a picnic. And there's so many resources out there now. You can just Google ideas. The schools are obviously sending all kinds of creative resources. There's so many things academically, but also games you can play. And you don't have to be the most creative, like you could be, Tori, you said you had to learn fun. So you don't have to be the most creative person. But if you sat down with a piece of paper in 15 minutes, you could come up with a pretty good list of some ideas, and the amount of stress that'll take off your plate when you wake up the next morning and you have some things on your list to go to, it'll be well worth the effort. And then the last comment I'll make is going back to something I've said every session is the key word, if you had one word to kind of take through this whole thing, is grace. Grace with yourself. So you might have this list and you might have planned out the schedule, and it may not go. Your kids may wake up grumpy, and you may have to change things around. Grace with your kids, grace with your spouse, grace with the other people that are living, in your life. Put a picture on your refrigerator, make it your screensaver, whatever you have to do to remind yourself, okay, it's about a time of grace.
Yeah, and I have a boy, so he found it a lot of fun to take Diet Coke and put Mentos in it, and it would explode. So that's a very inexpensive, fun thing to do, and create volcanoes with just little things in your kitchen. I think if you look at that stuff, kids like that, and it's not difficult to do. It's taking the time and being mindful. And I think in a time like this, because my son had so many medical issues, he experienced that very heightened level of anxiety. And when he experienced that very heightened level of anxiety, we ended up in an anxiety clinic for 3 months because it had gotten that severe. But one of the reasons that it had gotten that severe was because I overcompensated for the guilt and not being able to fix it. And I want to talk a little bit about the structure that Coven just brought up, and not overcompensating because you feel guilty that your kids aren't graduating, or you feel guilty, they're going to graduate, but they're not possibly having that ceremony, or you feel guilty that they can't attend a birthday party. The guilt as a parent, then we want to go fix it. And if we can't fix it, then our guidelines or what our structure typically would be, go away, or we overcompensate in many different ways. But can you talk a little bit about how damaging that overcompensation can be?
John said it really good. I think grace is really important, and Coven has, I think would be able to speak to this as well. The biggest thing is I think we're taking on responsibility for things we can't control. You can't control whether the school's open. You can't control whether the school chooses to have a graduation. And I think I spoke last week, just focusing on the things we can do. So the time and energy we might, or a parent or a family member or friend might be spending on what they can't do and we can't do, is how can we create an amazing, unique strange way to create, to celebrate this graduation, or maybe if there's a special event that hasn't been done before. So, you know, I've seen these drive-by birthday parties in the street. I've seen things like the dance party that some families started in like St. Cloud or Kissimmee. And I think it was interesting and fun, and it's obviously not going to match if we were all together dancing, having fun together, but that is what we can do now. It is still fun. It made me laugh. I just thought it was so funny. This whole neighborhood, they're just in Hunters Creek, they're just driving past the houses, and one of the son is in the car playing the music, the mom's recording, and each family member was dancing as they drove along. It was really fun. So finding a way to focus away from what we can't do and say, okay, so my son's graduating this year. I recognize, owning the fact he's not going to have a traditional graduation. What can I do to make this day special? How can we create something unique and different to make it special with the tools, technology, mainly, that we have now? That could be one answer. And John and Kobe, I'm sure you have some feedback as well.
Yeah, I think one of the first things I would do is distinguish between, is it guilt or is it shame? Okay, those two feelings feel very similar, but they're actually very different. Guilt is, I did something wrong. Okay, so we ask ourselves, guilt is very specific. If I question, you know what, yep, I stole $5. Yep, I called that person a name. Yep, I rolled my eyes when the boss was talking, whatever. There's something that's, I did something wrong. There's an antidote for guilt. That's forgiveness, whether that's asking forgiveness from somebody else or choosing to forgive ourselves. So guilt can be a healthy emotion because it motivates us to make amends, to get our heart right, to reconcile relationships and so forth. So guilt can be healthy. Shame feels very similar, but shame is vague, it's generic. As opposed to I did something wrong, shame is I am wrong. There's something wrong with me. I'm bad. I'm not good enough. I'm not, okay. And shame is never healthy. Shame is the fuel for all kinds of really negative things. It's the fuel for addictions. It's the fuel for all kinds of even depression. So shame can really trigger some nasty behavior. So there's techniques that we can do to get rid of shame and recognize it for what it is. So if it's guilt, okay, we ask ourselves, okay, if I did something wrong, what can I do? Now we may have, in the example that you gave, Tori, about like with your, a son not having a graduation ceremony, that's probably neither. It may feel similar, but you didn't do anything wrong, right? You didn't cause kids to not have a graduation. So it's not guilt. It's not shame. Like it could be like, oh, I'm a bad parent. I'm not being as creative. Maybe I'm not coming up with this drive around the block birthday party, dance, sing along, that you see on YouTube. And most parents you don't have the time or the energy or the resources to be able to do things like that. So it's recognizing, okay, what can I do? I think you go back to having that conversation because is it really coming from you or is it coming from your child? Like, is it shame? Like, I'm not a good enough parent. I see these other things that these parents are doing and that's shame. Okay, well, we got to get rid of shame. If it's something that maybe if your child is really upset, okay, then it's talking to the child and finding out, okay, going back to that feedback format, what are the facts and the data? Your graduation ceremony is canceled. What do you interpret about that? How do you feel about that? Okay, what can we do? And then come up with that kind of a creative alternative. And the creative alternative could be, it doesn't have to be Facebook viral video worthy. It can just be, a family get together. I gained something that is special to that individual child.
I think that's a key factor, is that it really, had the communication about what it actually is. I think that's always the start, is always acknowledging that, like not pretending like, people don't want to talk about these things. They just don't want to talk about them. It doesn't make them go away. It doesn't make our thoughts or feelings about those situations go away. I know I would be disappointed after 4 years of high school if I couldn't do my graduation or go through a graduation ceremony. So allowing or explaining to the child or young person, or for whatever the special occasion, anniversary, birthdays, explaining that it's okay to be upset that it isn't the traditional thing. And that allows, again, the child, whoever the other person, to communicate how they're feeling. And once we get that out of our bodies, my theory is always, when I'm doing any type of talk to anybody about supporting them, their self-care is better out than in, right? If we hold in all the emotion, all the confusion, all the anger, we don't ever talk about it, it's more likely we will react in negative ways, trigger responses instead of dealing with the situation. But it's always good, from even what John said, to really just have the conversation about what's really happening, the facts, the data, talk about it, and keep going down that ladder. I think oftentimes we don't allow young people or children to express that. We just assume that they're thinking the way we are as adults, and I don't think that's always the case.
I think I'd just reiterate what both John and Tony are saying about shame. One of my favorite authors, Brene Brown, she does a lot of research specifically about shame and how we kind of, the secret ways that we let shame into our lives and that we let it impact our relationships and our view of ourselves and different things like that. And one of the things that stood out to me in one of her books was how, we regard, as either parents or aunts or uncles or people of authority in younger people's lives, whether it's children or young adults, we often kind of regard things as if there's things that we shouldn't talk about. And, this could be because of generational differences, this could be just because of age gaps or things like that. But nonetheless, especially with, I think, younger kids, because they just want reality, even if it's a grim reality, it's kind of, they want the honesty. And sometimes as adults, we kind of think, I don't want to be honest about this situation because maybe I do have some shame, or maybe there is some guilt there. There's reasons for me to feel this way. But, we often kind of hide that because we're afraid of those unknowns. And oftentimes, instead of avoiding the unknowns, I think if we are just able to communicate openly about the unknowns and maybe even our, fear about unknowns, especially with kids, it gives them the opportunity, like Tony said, to kind of be open and honest about how they feel as well. And one of the things that is just, phenomenal about our current situation right now is there's no generation alive right now who has been through anything like this. So this is one of these things that every generation that's alive right now on Earth is going to have takeaways from this that are different. The greatest generation, so my grandparents, they lived through the Depression, the Great Depression. They have those hoarding tendencies now in their age, and they have those kind of ghost stories that informed the entire generation. And now we see their habits and their lifestyles and their neural pathways are all reinforced by that traumatic event. Now we're living through one of those traumatic events that will impact all of us for the rest of our lives here. And so all that to say, everyone is going to take this differently. And every generation, the kids, the Gen X, the Gen Z, the millennials, the boomers, everybody right now is struggling in different ways, but we also have abilities to offer things to the other generations. And so if you do have the benefit of being around kids, we talked about this last week with laughter and joy, giving them the freedom to express those feelings as well, and actually opening up about our fears gives them the opportunity to open up about their fears as well. And then also their joys, like I said, every generation has something to offer the others.
So I just want to talk real quick before we wrap up about what we're eating. I mean, I've gained 11 pounds in the last 3 weeks. I'm like, okay, done. I'm going to start eating healthy because I felt sluggish. I don't have the energy I would typically have, and I'm still exercising, but I was just carving out, right? And I know, John, that you guys work with Juice Plus. I believe you said that minors can get a free subscription if their parents have a subscription to that. But I think it's really important to understand if we're not feeding ourselves, what it does to our minds.
Well, I'll let John address the Juice Plus, but I'll start with a couple things that have been said today. Grace. We're in the house. We're probably going to eat more. We're not even, and I think I said this one of the other different talks, is that we're not doing the activity that we normally do. Even if it was just going to work and walking back and forth to our car and walking around at the office, there's less of that happening. So one of the things that Coben said about the breathing earlier is just be consciously aware. I'm eating chips. Am I hungry right now, or am I just eating because I'm either just bored or, so again, not shaming yourself for it or beating yourself up about it. Just go, okay, I'm eating, I'm not really hungry, I'm bored. And that moment may allow you to go, I don't really want these, and put it back. Or maybe I'll just have an apple, maybe choose a better option. So it's really, I think, the awareness and consciousness that Coven spoke of regarding the breathing and just being and intentional. And then John spoke about the grace, and combine those together to make sure, just being aware of where we are emotionally, mentally, physically. Most people, including me, I'm eating a lot more than I normally do. I put away a 6-pack of Italian ices in 2 nights. Like, it was pretty intense, but I'm aware of it. I like the Italian ice. I went through it. I don't beat myself up about it. I made better choices the next day in terms of what I'm eating, more fruits and vegetables, which can lead John into talking more about Juice Plus option as well and how that can help.
I do think, going back to what I mentioned, we were talking about earlier about shame and guilt. Secrecy kind of fuels shameful thinking and shameful beliefs. So I think one of the things is just by speaking it out, just by acknowledging that, hey, I'm overeating, or asking for help. Finding a neighbor, a friend, a roommate, or whatever that can say, hey, I really want to speak this out. I'm finding myself eating X, Y, Z that I don't want to eat. Can you provide some graceful accountability and support in that? Or changing my evening routine. I found myself wanting to carve out, like you said, more at night. So going for a walk, or trying to do something to shift my morning routine, or calling somebody, or doing something different to kind of change that mentality, for me was helpful. Although I'm still, I'm struggling like everybody else, but making steps. One of the simplest things, the reason I like Juice Plus, like you mentioned, it's just fruits and vegetables. It's regulated by the FDA. It's concentrated raw produce, but it's in a capsule form. It's got a food label on it, and it's 20 different fruits and vegetables that have been juiced and dehydrated and put into a capsule or into a soft chew. And you don't have to go to the store and make all the stuff or buy it. It's quick and convenient. In 30 seconds, boom, I can pop a capsule and drink a glass of water. And I know that, okay, at least I got some fruits and vegetables in today. And it's not a replacement for eating fruits and vegetables, but it helps you bridge the gap. You want to get as many as you can. Most of us don't get enough. So taking Juice Plus bridges that gap. And you mentioned kids between the ages of 4 and 18 can get it for free. And also full-time college students. With an adult sponsor. So obviously people can call our office, and we'd be more than happy to get them that information. But the research shows that when you're taking Juice Plus, your taste buds begin to change. You crave more fruits and vegetables. You drink less soft drinks. You eat fewer fast food meals. There's 1 million kids around the world getting it for free, and the research has been pretty impressive. Or people can call our office.
That would be the best thing, is to call the office, and we can touch base with them about the best way to, educate them on the product and how they can get it.
Anything else we want to wrap up before Coven gives us some stress exercises that we can show people? She's like, what?
Also, they could also just email, because I know a lot of people don't like to call. They just email info@totalhealthguidance.com. We'll follow up with them, and they can also do that on the Contact Us page. They can leave their information, and we can follow up with them through email as well. We'll call them or whatever they like. So those are other options. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Something that I've been doing more is just having miscellaneous dance parties, which, might be a personal preference, but turning on some of your favorite music and just letting yourself move with it, is really good. And especially because, we often think of movement or exercise as something that, we have to, I've got to go run 5 miles, or I've got to put on these tennis shoes and walk with sincerity, or we think of that it has to be this intense thing. But really, the health benefits of just simply moving around, is actually pretty profound, especially for stress, oxidative stress, things like this. And so something as simple as just dancing, having a mini dance party, 5 minutes throughout your day is really important. So things like that. There's a lot of good yoga YouTubes. Everything's so accessible now on the internet. And so finding different, just kind of more stretching techniques. If you hold stress and anxiety in your shoulders or your neck, you can look up yoga for neck you know, something as simple as that. And then there'll come up a video that just kind of teaches you how to stretch your neck out, which can certainly help. Some people hold their stress in their lower back, you know, and if they're sitting at home on their couch doing their computer versus maybe their ergonomically made desk chair, they can be having even more amplified back pain. And so stretches for the lower back you could find on YouTube too.
I heard there's laughing yoga. Somebody told me to go online and look up laughing yoga. I haven't done it yet, but I heard that.
You should. It's super fun. So I have a different version of laughing yoga, and that is me convincing my dad to do yoga with me. And then I just laugh. It's a little bit different. You know, it's not really like intentional, like laughing yoga, but we just tease each other while we do yoga together, and it seems to do the trick for laughing. But yeah, laughing yoga is really fun because, you know, if you're doing it right, then you can hardly stretch because you're laughing so hard. But of course, you know, laughter brings oxygenation to our cells, it brings lightness to our spirit, and just makes us feel way better.
Awesome. Any closing remarks? I really appreciate you guys taking your time and sharing with our community.
I think the Mentos, if you YouTube Mentos, like Mentos Coke Symphony, there's some amazing videos on YouTube where these two guys do this elaborate Mentos Coke. It's really amazing, and I just don't have the mind for it, but to do it. But I like watching it. So you and your family probably would get a really good kick out of it, Tori.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tori. I appreciate the time that you've taken to interview us. And I know we're going to do one more next Thursday, our final wrap up in the series. So again, thank you so much, Tori. I appreciate it.